Hi, my name's Phil Craig. I'm a writer, a TV producer, a lover of stories, and a connoisseur of scandal. And I'm on a mission to bring you the most scandalous tales ever told. So thanks for joining me here at the Scandal Mongers podcast. Welcome once again to me, Phil Craig, the Australian Bar Scandal Mongers podcast. And you are very, very welcome. It's nearly Remembrance Day. Got my poppy on. Which we wear over here in Britain at this time of the year. Actually, I got mine at the Imperial War Museum. I was saying last show, how proud I was to speak in Canberra at the Australian War Memorial. Well, I also got to speak in the last week at the British Imperial War Museum, which is another fantastic place of history and remembrance. And that was fun. But, of course, I'm rushing ahead. I'm rushing in all directions at once. This show, it's going to be a long show. Lots of things to talk about and some great guests. Shauna Kay, Vintage Read. I know loads of you are big fans of Shauna. I'm a big fan of Shauna, and I've been lucky enough to be on her programme several times. And she's coming on mine. And we're going to talk, of course, about the continuing fallout from the, what's the word, defenestration? He wasn't actually thrown through a window, was he? But the latest on former Prince Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Just a common man, just like you or I. Or is he? Will he face the same consequences that you or I might face for doing some of the things he's done? Well, we'll talk about all that. And we'll talk about the continuing fallout from the Virginia Giuffre book, and also people who've now stood up to criticise her with Shauna. And then in the middle of that, it's like a dream within a dream within a dream. It's my Christopher Nolan Inception approach to podcasting. So in the middle of my conversation with Shauna, old friend of the show, very well positioned to comment on this, Dai Davies, former senior Royal Protection Officer, knows the Royals, knows all about Royal Protection, knows all about Royal Tours, has strong things to say about Andrew. So I'll talk to Shauna. Shauna and I will then talk to Dai, and I'll come back at the end. Yeah, it'll all work out fine, I'm sure. But before that, yes, week of talks, and mustn't forget the biggest story of last episode, I should say. Sciatica, yes. So many of you reacted. I was waving around my walking stick. Well, I don't have a walking stick anymore, but I'm not totally better. It is a nasty thing, this sciatica, and it comes and goes, I've found. I have a few good days, went for a walk in the park with my grandchildren, then the next day can't get out of bed. I mean, I can, but it bloody hurts. So, yeah, it comes and goes. So many of you gave all sorts of medical advice. Thank you. It is funny, I used to run a health show for Britain's Channel 4 called The Pulse. Maybe some of you might remember it. And that was back in the 90s. I ran this health show. And I remember nothing got a bigger postbag for email, postbag, than back pain. Actually, I think maybe one thing did, hormone replacement therapy. That really used to get people arguing and debating. But back pain is, because the back is a mysterious organ. Is it an organ? Well, it's all a bit mysterious. It connects to nerves. And it's a weird thing, sciatica. You kind of cough and feel pain in your foot. You know, what's all that about? But yes, it's quite mysterious. So people take, some alternative cures or semi-alternative. Lots of you have said, go for acupuncture, go to the osteopath. Oh, no, don't go to the osteopath. Go to the chiropractor. Oh, no, they're all quacks. Don't go to them. Do sports massage or physiotherapy or Tai Chi, yoga, all of this stuff. I mean, I'll try anything. But thanks for all the advice. I mean, some of it was really helpful, actually. Marauder D3N. Thank you, Marauder. You recommended a few odd positions for me to get myself into, and the floor, propping myself in various ways. But they really helped. So thank you for that. Also, I think Another Blonde, if you're still listening or watching, you recommended something with a tennis ball, the small of the back. That kind of really worked for a bit as well. But you know what? The thing that really worked? Good old-fashioned hot water bottle. Yep. Mrs. Craig went out and bought me a hot water bottle. And when it's bad, I just stick it down the back of my trousers, at the top of my thigh, and it kind of just sort of slowly things relax. Yeah, strange thing. I have to tell you. I don't have to tell you, but I want to tell you. Mrs. Craig went above and beyond the other morning when I just couldn't really bend. So she actually... We've got to the stage of our marriage where I say, darling, could you help me put my socks on? And when I say put my socks on, I don't just mean my socks. But there you are. Marital duties and responsibilities. What a woman. Yes. So yes, it keeps us giggling. But yeah, I am getting a little better, but it's not easy. And thank you for all your comments about that. And that wasn't the only thing you were commenting on. In the show last week, I think it's the fourth most watched ever out of 130 something. So it really got a lot of you talking and commenting. There was also, I have to apologize, there was a live chat. I didn't know about this. Theo, the producer, decided he'd put it up when I was asleep. And I don't know whether he pressed the wrong button, but there was a live chat and several of you joined. And I only knew about this when I woke up, and I would have joined in. So if this happens again, I will definitely join in. Anyway, apologies for the miscommunications between producer and podcaster. But yeah, many thanks for all your lovely comments. Anne Walker, 4142. I've really enjoyed this discussion. This is me talking primarily to my friend Clive Irving. I've really enjoyed this discussion, and nice to approach it from a different angle and have a dignified conversation without too much anger and rhetoric. That was nice, thank you. Carol Woodward, Carol, you've commented on here a lot, and you sent me a few quid as well. Thank you for that, all the way from Virginia. I have received Nobody's Girl. That's Virginia Giuffre's book. I have received Nobody's Girl. Building up the courage to read it is taking a bit of time. Yeah, a lot of you said this. It's the sort of story that you feel you should read. I would urge you to. It's not quite the book you expect. It's actually quite a bit better than I thought it would be. But it is upsetting, and it is probably triggering if you've had that kind of experience in your life or know somebody who has. So be aware of that. But yeah, thank you, Carol. Viga of the Liar. Viga, you're always on here. Thank you. The depravity is appalling. You're quite right. But I did smile at Mr. Irving's comments about Andrew. This dumb Andrew is so stupid. His cupidity is amazing. What a bloody idiot. It made me wanly smile. Well, that's nice. I'm glad. Yeah, so lots of comments on the show. Grant Hater Menzies. Hi, Grant. Has some thoughts. Yes, I used to fly around the world for my work in book launches and research. Nice job if you can get it, Grant. But it was sciatica that put a stop to it. I feel your pain literally. Crikey. I hope it's not stopping me doing this because, as you probably know, nothing I like more than jumping on a plane and going to Australia or somewhere else. But yeah, at the moment, I couldn't face it. I really couldn't. Somebody really took me to task, and I want to address this. A woman who likes the podcast, who's commented before, who's watched before, Ivy. I don't know your full name, Ivy, but you really did get. You said you were very disappointed, quite angry. There was as part of our conversation between Clive and me, Clive started talking about he didn't think Trump was probably amongst the worst of was an abuser of young women in the Epstein circle because the sort of girls, the women, well, they're children really, aren't they? That have figured thus far, they're not his type. And I let that pass. Even as Clive said it, I thought, I'm not sure. I probably should have said something, and I apologise that I didn't, because of course, as Ivy points out, anybody who knows anything about sort of predators, and Trump, by his own admission, has taken advantage of women in the past, up to and including kind of grabbing them, as we know famously. So, predators don't have a type. They are opportunistic. And I know this from my own work in this area. And I should have said something. And I have no idea if Trump did anything with the Epstein stable of slaves, whatever you want to call them. I don't know. I don't think anybody knows really yet. It quite possibly didn't. Certainly Giuffre's rather nice about it in her book. But, to say that a man like that has a type, I think was probably a bit offensive. So apologies. Yeah. Equal opportunity offenders, the real predators that move in our world. They'll take anything they can get. Sorry about that, Ivy. I live and I learn. What else? Well, I don't want to talk too long because there's quite a lot to come. I did speak about the various political scandals in Britain in the last show, and they kind of rumbled on. The one that really interested me, I think I spoke about the funding of Starmer's campaign. That's all very kind of unset. That's sort of gone away. These things have a habit of returning, though. His campaign to become leader of the party. Then there was this new argument about Rachel Reeves, who's the Chancellor of the Exchequer, therefore is in charge of the country's money. Turns out she didn't pay a fee to rent her house. It's only about £1,000, but it's legally, it's legal. You have to do it if you want to rent your house in certain parts of the country. She knew about it. She didn't pay it. She says it was a breakdown of communication. She's a busy woman. It can happen to anybody. It's fine. I get that. But she did break the law, and she initially didn't tell the truth about it, because initially she said she didn't know. Then she said, "Oh, she did." But the worst thing I think about all of this is going back to the previous Conservative government, which was riddled with scandals and lost a lot of support because of its scandals. And Rachel Reeves was one of many people on the left. I mean, I was probably one of them who said, you've got to be, lawmakers can't be lawbreakers, no matter how small. If somebody breaks a rule, they're in trouble. They've got to go. They've got to be accountable. And she even said this about the previous Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, who had a very, very minor infraction of the COVID rules. And basically, he was in a room in a meeting in Downing Street when somebody brought in some cake, which classified it as a party. I mean, this is a teetotaler. This is about as a famously workaholic tech bro nerd. He's not one of the Downing Street party animals, and there were some. So, but Reeves said, you've broken the letter of the law. You should go. Well, you apply that same logic to Rachel Reeves. Rachel, you should go over this. You haven't. You're kind of styling it out, hoping it'll go away. Maybe it will go away, but it's just another one in a series of scandals. I mean, there's been lots of ministers have to lose their jobs over this sort of thing. And we mustn't forget one of the reasons Starmer is in number 10 is he promised we move on from that. We'd be stern rectitude. He'd be boring. He'd be professional. He'd be managerial. He'd get things done. And there wouldn't be all these endless scandals. Well, so far, that's been a massive disappointment. And it's depressing. But there you are. That's my feeling about all that. But you don't come and hear Phil going on about Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer. Hopefully you come up with some good scandals. So I'm going to stop going on. Thank you for joining me again. I hope you enjoy Shauna, and then within Shauna, Dai. Oh, that sounded a bit weird. Shauna, and then inside the Shauna segment, Dai, and then back to Shauna and me, and hopefully it'll all make sense and be really interesting, and I'll see you at the end. Thanks ever so much for watching. Bye-bye. Shauna, thank you for coming onto my programme. This is my last one, I think, was an away fixture on your wonderful show. And now it's time for the home leg. So, like the Ashes.
Yes, this is so exciting. Thank you for having me. I feel just so relaxed because I can just be questioned rather than trying to come up with them myself.
Well, I think I have a little bit of unfinished business from our conversation, which I wanted to talk to you about. Because it was an away fixture, I got a bit of barracking from your home crowd, and maybe I deserved it when we talked about Virginia's book. And that whole area, which is so hard to kind of get your head around, which is in the book itself, she talks about the fact that she was sort of part of the gang, the Epstein gang, even though she was also perhaps its most important victim. And just that's a very difficult area to talk about, and I probably didn't do it very sensitively. But I'd noticed in the last week, I don't know if you've seen, another victim is now taking her on, saying, I mean, that's just the wheels within wheels. This woman, I think she's called, what's she called?
Rena O.
Rena
O, yeah.
And I just think maybe the darkness of that world, it's quite possible to be an abuser and whilst being abused. I mean, is that the fair reckoning of all that, do you think?
Well, I think she was very honest about that in the book because she sort of explained how it happened. She didn't excuse it. But she said it was sort of the pathway that was expected because she actually met up with Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell when she was 16. Andrew was 17, but when she was 16, so very, very young. And when she got even just a few years older, as you know, even when she had the interaction, well, the alleged interaction with the then Prince Andrew, she was sort of considered even too old then because that comment about Ghislaine Maxwell. So the pathway was to go into recruiting and getting him girls. And Virginia tells the story about doing that a few times. And that was the moment where she just realized she had to get out because she just felt so grubby, so awful. But I think the expectation was you did it because I think the main thing was you couldn't afford to become not valuable. Because once you weren't not valuable, then something could happen. But you make a really good point about Rena O because when I read it, I thought there's another victim. there's someone who is so damaged and so affected by her experience. And I also realized that she made a statement which I thought was really valuable. You're right, she did raise doubts about Virginia's credibility. But before that statement, and this is a direct quote, it's not finessed in any way, she said, I know she was trafficked.
Mm.
And she didn't qualify that. She then went on and had a go at Virginia's credibility, but she didn't backtrack from that statement. And she said it very clearly, I know she was trafficked. And at that point, I thought, well, you both suffered from this man. Who knows what it takes, what you will do in order to survive that, that experience that day. And Virginia, interestingly, had accused her of sexual abuse. And that court case was pending when Virginia died. So, it's a she said thing. But to me, it doesn't matter.
No.
It just matters that she said, I know she was trafficked. And I think Rena O is very brave to come out and say her experience. And I just hope, look, anyone they got trafficked to, I hope they face justice one day.
Well, of course, and so do I. And actually, I was thinking about this because I was you know, I I should have known a little bit more about this from my own life. I ran in the 90s one of the BBC's biggest ever investigations into the abuse of children in the Kincora Boys' Home. I mentioned it in some of the earlier episodes of this podcast. And that was harrowing. And the testimony I've read and the people I met has really stayed with me. But one of the things that came through that was actually it's the same mental process. It's people who were just horrifically treated who then become subject of coercive control. And also they believe that they're valuable to the men who are abusing them. And they are
Yeah,
themselves recruited into getting more victims. So that process,
yeah,
Epstein didn't invent it. I mean, abusers have
no,
known that trick for a long, long time. So I
yeah,
actually should have been more sensitive to that. But no, it's very interesting to kind of because I think that one of the things that came out from the fall of Andrew and the losing his titles in the House, which I guess is what we're really talking about today, is that
yeah,
it was the triumph of these victims, these unimportant, disposable women from the
yeah,
wrong side of the tracks. They brought down a
yeah,
prince. I mean, this is something we
yeah.
should celebrate.
Yeah, I think maybe even it was really as simple as the fact that his own emails brought him down.
Yeah.
I know it, we want to give credit to victims, but when it all comes down to it, it was when he was caught in that lie. And that was when people thought, and I think that's when the king thought, you're bringing dishonor on the House of Windsor because you lied, you've
I'm
been
not
caught in a lie.
As you know, I'm
Yeah,
not the world's biggest fan of King Charles, but actually, I think he showed some real steel, and I think probably William was pushing him to do this,
yeah,
and I'm
yeah,
glad he's done it. And actually, I think he's probably, I wouldn't, it's over dramatic to say saved the monarchy, but there were rumblings, the Queen is gone, that generation that feels that loyalty because of the memories of the war, that's dying
mm,
out. The
mm,
New Statesman, a really influential magazine on the left, had a big story a couple of weeks ago saying, is it time to call it quits? And this is read by people in government, the Labour government. And I think, if the king hadn't done something dramatic, that kind of talk could well have rumbled on.
yes. And it's so interesting, Phil, that we've been told for so many years that there's nothing they can do. There's nothing they can do. They can't take away his titles. And then it actually was quite simple. I mean, I'm sure it wasn't emotionally, but it was pretty quick. And it's sort of, we've spun a lot of things, aren't we? And you probably don't, you're probably too savvy, but, we accept these things. And then it turns out, oh, no, actually
Yeah,
he can do it. So
you're
yeah.
a really you're a William watcher and a big William fan. What? And I know you've been doing lots of conversations about this subject. What have you deduced of his role in this kind of denouement for his uncle?
Well, I think it comes down to the fact that he is sort of asserting some power now, and I think he's getting to say what he wants going forward. I think he's more willing to say what he wants now because it's sort of in that transitional phase, due to King Charles's ill health. I'm not sure that I'm accurate, but it just feels like there is a real definite power shift. And so, yes, I would believe that he would want it cleaned up. I think his clarion call was the Eugene Levy interview. I
Yeah,
think he really marked out his territory at
that's
that
really good.
point.
Wasn't it?
Yeah. And he said, I'm going to make changes and I'm not afraid to make them. And I think probably his father thought, well, if I'm going to make a mark, if I'm going to leave a legacy, we don't really want to leave a legacy that when my son takes over, he has to clean up all my mess.
Mm.
Maybe I should start cleaning up a bit of mess. And I think that's what's happened. But I think really it is on King Charles how long this took, the messy way it came about. It was actually sort of drawn out more than it needed to. If there had been decisive action and a statement from the king right at the get-go, and not that horrible statement from Andrew, a few weeks before, it would have been a lot simpler. But it's interesting. What do you think? Do you think the media in the UK, particularly the Royal Rota, is accepting it? Do they think it's enough?
Oh yeah, well I don't know. Well, we'll talk a little later to Di about what might be happening next, because I don't think the press or the justice system in two continents is finished with him yet. Um, but I think that there's a great deal of pleasure in the fact that I mean, I read this really interesting piece by Hadley Freeman, a feminist writer who I admire, used to write in The Guardian, now in The Times. And she was saying this is a sort of turning point of social history. Andrew almost represents a very distant past where, men like that could just get away with anything. And
Yeah.
especially if they were protected by their kind of status and their money, almost like a 19th century view of the monarchy, Edward VII carousing his way around Europe. And that, let's be fair, that possibly carried on into Philip's time. You think Andrew Loney's book about Andrew was in century. Wait till you hear what he has to say about Philip in a couple of
Well,
years.
I'm really hoping he doesn't find anything too horrible. I mean,
Well, I
plus,
don't think
well, we
necessarily
all know that he's
I
had
think it's
affairs and things,
I
but
don't think it's necessarily abuse, but I think it is just entitlement and the
yeah,
smorgasbord of goodies, especially goodies involving young women. It's just naturally yours, isn't it? And you should just be able to pick and have your fun here and there. And the little people don't need to know. And your wife will look the other way.
I don't think people care. I think honestly, with Andrew, it was just the trafficking aspect. So if I don't think in this day and age people really care if everybody's running around, having sex with everyone. I don't think they care that much. I don't think people are that prudish about it. I think it's the allegations of criminal
Well, of that, of
and
course.
also cover up. The cover up. That's what gets
That took
people.
it to a new level. But to me, anyway, again, influenced by Andrew Loney's book, the sexual stuff with Andrew and Epstein was wrapped in with this idea that he could have what he wanted, whether it's money, whether it's parties, whether it's travel, selling his house somehow in a dodgy way. The normal rules don't apply to men like us, and that's what
Yes.
Stephen was saying. I
Yes.
think this maybe marks the fact that they do, even if you're a prince, they do apply to you, and they should. So I thought that was quite interesting.
Very.
It does leave open the question of what happens to his daughters, of course. I mean, there's a certain amount of sympathy for them. I mean, can you imagine at your 18th birthday party, your dad turns up with at least three people who are going to end up in prison? Was it
Oh yeah.
Weinstein, Maxwell, and Epstein?
Yes.
Sarah also
What a
takes.
trio.
Sarah took them to some
Yeah.
dodgy parties as well. I mean, I don't know what they must think. I mean, my sense is we should be kind to them. I don't think it's their fault that they.
Yeah. I think it's really unfair if they take, the fall for this, but in some ways I think they're going to have to, unless they look into their finances and check for any, unethical deals, any shadiness there, anything sort of connected to their dad or their mum in any way. I suggested on my show that if they got in an independent auditor to go through all their financial arrangements and pledge that that independent auditor would be going through their affairs from now on, that a lot of people would have sympathy and say, well, look, they're really trying to clean all this up. They're making sure that there's nothing untoward that they're connected to. Although I think Andrew Loney is of the opinion that they're very definitely connected to under the radar financial deals.
Well, the whole family,
And so we'll have to wait for proof. Yeah.
in a sense, all of Andrew's family, including his, well, and especially Sarah, relied on him having access to this dodgy network because they were so
Yeah.
impecunious and
Yeah.
disorganized. What was it? Calamity Jane, as Tina Brown called Sarah. They were always getting into scrapes, and they would just go to Dad for money. And where Dad's got his money from, they didn't really want to know, and they didn't really care.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
in that respect, I think your idea is a good one that they should just open it up and say, we want to be public servants. We want to represent the royals. We want to do the good royal things that people want us to do, but let's start from
Yeah.
a clean slate.
Yeah, I think that's what I'd do if I was, if I was trying to distance myself from my shady parents. That's what I'd do. I would become an open book. I would
Or
be
is it maybe this is
transparent.
finally the moment for William to really wield the axe and say, slimmed down monarchy, totally slimmed down. There's just a
Yeah.
hardcore public service at the heart of it, incredibly open and independently audited every year.
Yeah.
Now that would,
Denmark's model.
yeah, exactly. That would be something
Yeah.
they're thinking.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's pretty silly that you've got princesses and, that aren't working royals only turning up for garden parties. And I think it's also probably pretty silly to have an American princess and American prince in Lily and Archie. It just sort of doesn't make sense because they then haven't even had any experience in the UK. And that's nothing against the little kids. I mean, you
No.
know, it's not that, it's just that it seems a bit silly. And also, how can you live in the USA and have a title that's related to Sussex? I mean, it just all seems quite messy and unnecessary in some ways, doesn't it?
Well, I was going to ask you actually how you felt all of this because it is a very big junction point. This, I think, in the story of the British royal family, what happened in the last week. It's a
Yeah.
big kind of gear change. How do you think all of this affects Harry and Meghan and their family?
I think it would affect Harry more than Meghan. I think Harry still has a a sense of duty, although he's, been misled and he's got to take responsibility for his part. I think it would affect him more because he's grown up in the institution, he's grown up in the royal family, he knows what it means, and I don't think he thought in a million years that that would be the consequence. That
Mm.
he could actually lose his title or even lose the title of prince. I think that would absolutely pull the rug out from underneath him. But in some ways, it may finish. He's always declared he wants to be free. He wants to be free of the institution. He left and he wanted to be independent of it. And finally, it's like ripping off a band-aid.
Yes.
It might be at that point that he realizes he doesn't need to be a prince. And it could be at that point that, oh, I don't know. I don't think they'll ever, they're not going to reconcile. I mean, William just doesn't trust him. So I don't think that's going to happen. But it could end up in a more positive way if it's just cleaned up. But isn't it messy with the Council of State and the line of
Yes.
succession? Now
Yes.
you've got Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, who's still a Council of State. I know he won't be called on, but he's in the line of
He is
succession, Phil. It's so messy.
various MPs are agitating to have that changed and look talking to the lawyers and constitutional experts. I don't know with Harry. I mean, I do have some. Most of my sources probably stem from my previous work on Diana and Charles, but I do have some pretty good ones. And certainly about 4 or 5 months ago, there was a lot of talk around the time of that meeting that William was interested in a reconciliation with his brother,
Really?
like best mates,
Wow.
not like best mates forever, but just enough so that they could be in public a couple of times a year, and it would just take the heat out of all of it.
Right.
That's
That's
my
very pragmatic, isn't it?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Because it would take the heat out of it. But that surprises me. I guess the main thing you'd have to be careful about is if there was another point of tension
Mm.
that it didn't end up in a rogue interview or it didn't end up in another book or another docu-series or something like that. Because once you take that genie out of the bottle, and things aren't going your way, he could be tempted to do it again. And I think that's the sticking point. Because really, he had an opportunity when he came over for his last pseudo royal tour and he did that 4 days.
Mm.
He was told, don't tell anyone about the meeting. Don't tell anyone the details of the meeting. And what does he do? He goes off to Ukraine with the Guardian newspaper, does a sit down, and spills the beans, things that he shouldn't have divulged. So he just isn't equipped. He needs a permanent aide with him, telling him what to do
Oh, of
all
course, he's
the
always been his
time.
own worst enemy, and that will probably continue. The other thing was,
Yeah.
after all that talk of a possible, tentative reconciliation, there was then all these other stories that the Netflix deal was contingent on him doing a film about Diana for the anniversary in 2027,
Mm,
which could
yeah.
that could set the whole thing on another trajectory. Because you
Yeah. Yeah.
great,
I heard something about Patrick Jefferson maybe being involved in that. Have you heard anything, seeing he's your mate? No.
no, and I text with him almost
Oh,
every day.
oh, that would have been a scoop. Ah, well,
He's not a
yeah,
fan of Harry, though. If he was to work with anybody, I suspect he'd work with William on a show. But I don't know whether he'd work with either of them, to be honest. Don't forget,
no,
those boys, when they were still boys, were wheeled out to attack Patrick when he wrote his own book not long
yeah,
after Diana's death. So there's a lot of scar tissue there.
yeah,
It
yeah,
was very
yeah,
much Camp Diana.
yeah. So he never spoke to them once they were adults.
I don't think he ever spoke to them, no.
No, right. Yeah, so it's a such a mess, and I don't know really what the end game's going to be. Of course, we've just had Robert Jobson's book come out, which is dropping bombshells left, right, and centre, and there's going to be Norman Baker's book
Oh, no,
coming
all these
out.
people. I mean, I worked with
Yeah,
Jobson is such a funny man. He was one of the best informed of all those that Royal Rat Pack in back in the day.
really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, back in the day, I
No,
believe it.
no, they were
Yeah,
all, I mean, they were
yeah.
all over those Diana Charles stories when he was, when, I mean, they're all, God, they must be older than me now. I mean, it
So
feels,
that's his heyday. Yeah,
well,
yeah.
just Di will be joining us shortly. What I really wanted to talk to him about, I mean, this is a man he's run Royal Protection. He was in the 90s a very important detective operating around the Royals. He knows them all personally. And I don't know if
Mm,
you saw, he came out a couple of days ago to say that he thinks that police on both sides of the Atlantic should now be sitting down with Andrew, which is why I've invited him to join us.
yeah, fascinating.
Well, I think
And how did you meet Di? How did you get to know him?
through my previous work and also through Andrew, he's been on the podcast a couple of times. He lives in this
Right.
slightly crumbling, beautiful country pile. And given that it's autumn here, I predict he'll turn up in a very big fur hat because the heating is the kind of guy.
He's certainly a powerful voice. I've saw quite a
Yeah.
few interviews with him over the last few days, and I think, he's very compelling. I think people would listen to him, obviously, because of his former position, but also he just states it clearly and in a common sense sort of way where you listen to him and you think, of course, why wouldn't that happen? And you realize how crazy it is that Andrew hasn't been questioned yet.
Well, there is an awful lot of public money has gone into this man, subsidizing his lifestyle, his travels, supposedly unofficial business. Whereas, of course, he kept disappearing for these unscheduled meetings, assignations, and as a consequence of these trips, various deals were done. And in one understands he got commissions on some of them. He met powerful people, some of whom bought his house at an inflated price. It is kind of like the behavior you might expect from the mafia rather than the royal family.
Yeah, and also when you think about if you start to add up all those millions that we're told about in Andrew's book, you're wondering where has all this gone? Because the house sale alone was millions and millions. There's stories of 4.5 mil in Kazakhstan for a oil deal, and there's all these huge amounts of money, and you're just wondering, well, where's it gone?
Well,
It
nobody
it
knows.
it
And
must be somewhere.
that's for historical reasons and maybe the good old-fashioned British, you know, ability to bend the knee to these people. Even
Yeah.
after all they've done, there is still, I think, a reluctance to really treat royal people like you or I would be treated. that we're
Yeah.
expected to account for the money we've got, and if we've
Yeah.
got something a little bit dodgy, we'll be held to account. And I think
Yes.
it goes to that idea of the different century. He's lived in a world beyond any kind of scrutiny for so long that he just
Yeah.
felt every time he ratcheted it up another notch, another trip,
Y-
and
Yeah.
a bung,
I
that
think, yeah,
already
true. I
done.
think people aren't prepared to put up with this above the law thing anymore.
No, they're not.
I actually heard Richard Kay say the other day on an interview, he said that it's only King Charles that cannot be charged with anything. He said it's such a load of nonsense. Every other royal is subject to the same laws that you and I are. And I thought, well, that's a very optimistic view, but I don't think we've had much evidence of that to actually back up that statement. But he seemed to firmly believe it when he said it. So
Well,
it'd be interesting to see if
just
it's
on what
tested out.
just on what's in Virginia's book, that is actually evidence of a crime
Yeah.
she's alleging.
Yeah.
A young woman who's been trafficked.
Yeah.
Certainly in America, she would not be of age at 17. In Britain, perhaps
Yeah.
just on the cusp, but
Yeah.
unwilling, trafficked, that at
Yeah.
very least should require a conversation with the police. Nothing like that's happened yet with Andrew, and maybe it now will. I don't know. We can ask Di about that.
I
Shall
think
we,
you've been a
shall we
little
take,
bit
shall we
too
take,
harsh on
take a
yourself,
minute break?
though, Phil, about your reaction to the book, because I think what you gave was a well educated view of a first reading of a book. And you probably had the reaction that everybody would have had. I mean, it's not as if you and I spend our days, you know, being able to give therapy to people that have been abused, or we don't have that well of knowledge. And so I just think that I got a bit of a bollocking in the comments as well, but I think really it's impossible to get right. And I think that is the purpose of discussing it, because it's only by discussing it that we find out, oh, that was, people didn't accept what I said there, and why didn't they accept it? And look, it's not always right. Criticism isn't always right. So I think you're being a little too harsh on yourself. I
Oh, that's
thought
very
you
nice of you.
were
And you
very,
yourself,
very sensitive, really.
you yourself,
So, yeah.
you said that the words, which I think I'd probably forgotten, and then I remembered really from my work in the 90s on King Cora, coercive control. Once somebody is trapped like that, then you can't judge them by the same standards as just a regular person,
Mm,
because they are basically in a web. They've limited options. They might be frightened.
mm,
They might have persuaded themselves that these people are somehow their friends, just as a way of
yeah.
getting through the next 24 hours.
And I also think being a bloke, you probably, I don't know, but you probably haven't had the experience where you've had someone touch you and or do something you didn't want them to do, invade you in some way, and you have just frozen.
Mm,
And you would think that I would be a fairly strong woman, and that I could look after myself and I would stand up for myself. But twice in my life that has happened. It wasn't a serious attack. It wasn't anything, what Virginia has suffered. But I have had that experience. And twice I froze
really.
and couldn't defend myself, couldn't respond. I think I literally went back into my fear or flight brain, and my body just froze me. And it wasn't a serious attack. It was, really quite minor. I mean, back in the day, people would say, it was a slap and an unwanted slap and a tickle,
Yeah.
that sort of attitude that was prevalent around when we were around in the 90s. But it had a real impact on me. And it happened in a lift, and I still get hot and
Gosh.
anxious if I have to go into a lift. And if I had to go into a lift with a guy, there's no way. If I didn't know them,
I'm so sorry. I'm so
I'd be
sorry.
waiting. But the point is, it wasn't a bad thing at all. It was very minor. But the thing is, the terror and the freezing, I think that's why I could relate. Because if I was in Virginia's position in that room, I doubt whether I would have done anything different than she did. having had that experience now. And intellectually, you like to think that you would be like, get off me, get away, I'm going to the police, or, being very assertive. Maybe now I would be, but back then, no. And I was a little bit older than Virginia. I was 18. So, but I think being a big man, you probably, hopefully, haven't had that
No,
experience,
I
and I think
haven't.
that
And
does. Yeah,
it is hard to put yourself in other people's shoes and to feel that.
yeah.
And also, as you say, maybe also a bit disappointed that you weren't able to kind of, do your kind of like
Yes, hindsight's a wonderful thing.
just kind of freeze. And I mean, people often report.
Yeah, you sometimes I think your body just takes over. And it's a survival instinct to make yourself small, make yourself still, and try to disappear down into the floor. And but everyone's different. That's the thing.
Famous,
Everyone's different.
I know
Yeah.
a British journalist, a famous British writer. I won't name her, but I worked with her in the late 80s, and she came out of a lift once really upset because somebody had just basically grabbed her. Somebody who was like, who knew her, wasn't a stranger.
Oh,
And it was that, oh, it's just a joke, love.
yeah,
And those experiences, they can stay with you. They can really freak you out. So
yeah,
once,
yeah. And
once,
you feel a degree of shame too, because you think back and you think, did I encourage that? Did I give off the wrong signal? All that sort of thing. And you also feel too ashamed to tell anyone it happened because you think they're going to think, well, you probably did this or that. It's so
it is. And
complicated.
I think being a man, it is different. I was once touched up, as it happens, in a drunk
Oh,
party environment by another bloke. Because look,
oh,
it happened. It didn't upset me. I just treated it as a bit of a joke. But that's because he was no physical threat to me, and it was in company. There are
yes,
around. It's very different if you're physically, much smaller, and you're trapped in a bloody lift.
yes,
That
yes,
thing altogether, and I don't think blokes can experience that very often.
yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't know where Dyer's gone. He should be with us. I'm just. We may have to do a little. Oh no, here he is.
Here
Right on
he
cue.
is.
Hello.
Di, welcome.
Yeah, sorry
Hello.
I'm late. I couldn't get on, so I had to go back to re-sign myself into Zoom for some reason. All your fault, Phil.
It is my fault. Di, can I introduce you to my good friend Shauna, all the way from Brisbane?
G'day.
Hi, Di.
G'day.
Lovely to meet you. G'day.
Excellent. I love your
Yes.
country.
Oh, that's lovely. That's good. How often have you got over our way?
I went over a few years ago to Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane, and it was wonderful. And the lovely coastline in just wonderful.
Oh, lovely. Oh, that's great.
Great.
Yeah.
And where are you now?
I'm just sort of north of Brisbane.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
noticed you got my favorite book there, Edward the Eighth.
Oh, really? The Phil Ziegler one. I feel like I'm betraying Andrew Loney though. I've had his book up for the last 2 weeks. I've just just
Have
swapped
you?
it over.
Well, I
Yeah.
can't get it. Well, I could get it if I wanted to spend all that money, but he sent it to me a copy by email. So I'm steadily working my way in, but I feel I know it already anyway, because
Yes.
he's on television far more than even me.
Yes. Well, I'm really keen to ask you questions, but I better let our host go first, Phil.
Oh, well, thank you. No, I just wanted to say hello, Di. I was saying to Shauna before you joined us that you would probably join us in a massive big hat because your heating would have broken. This is how I
Well,
remember things.
funnily enough, well, it hasn't broken, but we haven't had the heating on here, and this place is 450 years old, and that's why I've got a scarf on and
Ah.
a Barber jacket and so on and so forth. Not like you slumming it in the hot weather down south there.
Uh, all right. Well, I wanted to speak to you because I read various stories in the fallout, I guess, from Andrew losing his title, and it reminded me of the conversations we had had, about 6 months ago, when you said, from your perspective, you're surprised that the police had not ever really been involved on either side of the Atlantic. So my main question to you is, what now might change? And are you still of the same opinion that he needs to sit down with the cops?
Well, yes, back before his infamous interview with Emily, I was helping Panorama, went over to Northern Ireland with the lovely Irish journalist investigator, Darren, and I was all ready to go then. And in fact, they did a pre-interview recording, which I had a minute or two, as I normally do, even though I was interviewed for hours, where I said then, look, this is a police matter. It should be investigated. But also, I was aware that there was a lot of concern and had been about his behavior whilst he was a so-called trade envoy and ambassador. And so when I saw the interview, I actually amazingly was invited back on to Newsnight, either the following night or 2 days later, when I actually articulated then that there ought to be, because trafficking, as I've said so often these days, is a criminal offence. 1/3 of the alleged offence took place allegedly in London, and two of the alleged participants were British. And I've always said and think, and I think my knowledge of the law is reasonable, that that is a criminal offence. And at the least, the Met Police, when it was reported to them, albeit some years later, had a duty to investigate it. And they apparently looked at it. We don't know what they did at the time, but came to the conclusion not once, not twice, but 3 times that they weren't going to pursue it. And because they didn't feel that the jurisdiction issue was sufficient for them to get involved, but rather it should be left to others. And that's where the situation remained until the latest hoo-ha, where again, I've called for not only that to be investigated, but also for 15 years plus, royalty protection officers went with him everywhere. And there are log records to show they went to the Little Virgin Islands, everywhere, to Florida. And so I felt they must have seen something. And yet nobody said anything. Nobody has said, look, this is an ocean-going pervert. This is a man who, who you could quite clearly see. And I've seen from the evidence and photographs, everywhere you went, there were pictures of naked women, of young girls, etc., and sexual objects all over the place. Didn't any of them, they're meant to be police officers, say, this isn't right, this isn't normal? Well, who did they tell? And again, palace officials. He used to take people with him everywhere, a whole retinue of people. So to my cynical brain, who has kept all this to themselves? Why hasn't this been reported, or has it been?
I think it's really interesting the point you make, Dai, about the fact that there must have been people in the know. So obviously it wouldn't be hyperbole to say that it was a network that literally enabled this man and covered up for him.
Well, that's, until you ask questions, as I often say, you won't find any evidence. And I've been in this game 54, 55 years, and I've investigated outside the United Kingdom a huge range of things, from, Lucy Blackman in Japan to various cases, all over the world. And unless you ask questions, you'll never find the evidence. And by asking those questions, by asking witnesses, you can build up a case. And that's how, in my generation of investigators did it. You go around and round the circle until it closes in. And certainly when you're investigating corrupt people, you follow the money trail. And that's what I've been saying for a long time to anyone who will listen to me. Follow his money trail, and boy, will you find I've got to say alleged corruption, but, it's more and more his association with everyone from Gaddafi to a businessman called Edwards, to Chinese alleged spies. I mean, it's a catalogue of bad people. There's no other way of saying it. If in any other industry, not only would he have been sacked, he would have been investigated. And yet we're still footing. And I was watching Newsnight last night where they said, well, it's up to the palace. Well, with great respect to the palace, they've done sweet FA for years. And I'm thinking, no, it shouldn't be up to the palace. It should be either Parliament or the National Criminal Investigation unit to look into it. Not only his actions as alleged to have done against this poor woman and why the police didn't, but also I say very strongly, and I agree with everything Andrew Lowney has said, this is a man that needs investigating. But we're still 2 weeks on. What have they done? We don't know. Have they done anything?
Mm,
Now,
yeah.
Dai, you've arranged many tours around the world for the protection of royal people. Isn't it normal to get briefing from the local law enforcement? And is it not the case that it now seems they were looking into Epstein from, 2003, 2004? So a lot of Andrew's travels, someone like yourself would have sat down, would they not, with an American or the other local law enforcement, and they would have said, "By the way, this guy's a bit more than a little dodgy. We're thinking of charging him with these really horrific crimes." Or is that just not the way it works?
Well, no, I totally agree with you. And each visit is a separate plan, if you like, done in conjunction with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, the flights, whoever's flying him there. A whole range of people would sit down prior to these tours, or certainly it was in my day. And as you rightly say, it would be looked at. And again, part of the reconnaissance, and you pay a lot of money for these officers to fly out before such these events to each of these venues. You're quite right. You liaise with but not only the local police, but national police forces, depending where you are and who they are. And yes, it's part of the parcel. And it's not just done once a year or once every other year. It's done every time. So you're quite right. And I had a quote in the Observer on Sunday where I asked that question for 15, 20 years. What did they see? And yet, everybody says, oh, they're like the three monkeys. Three see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. So what on earth has been going on?
Well, is
And
it is it just that great British vice of deference? Is it just that people, he's royal, he's important, he's the Queen's favourite son. We just don't go there because he's special. Does that really explain?
yes, I think there's maybe some truth in that. There may be that people have been there too long with him. There are many people frightened of him. Certainly, some senior officers I've seen kowtow to the royals. I remember my immediate boss says, "You're not very deferential." I said, "No, I'm Welsh." And as my wife says, that covers everything, really. But they're human beings, and we should apply it within reason. Obviously, respect, because we should respect to a degree. But, respect has to be earned. And if you're an oafish, bully, arrogant, and so on, which he clearly is and was, then why should any one of us give him any deference and any respect? And I certainly don't, and I certainly haven't. And there are one or two others I could mention, but I won't on this program.
Do you think it just comes down to the fact that it's a career killer, though? The fact that even if, for example, the PPO that was asked to look into Virginia Giuffre and was given her social security number, clearly that's not on. You've made the point that, any such inquiry would have to be conducted in a legal way. You made that point in another interview. That's the main consideration, and that he should have been basically told to sod off when he proposed that. But the fact that that didn't happen, would that be just because people are trying to retain their jobs, trying to not be demoted?
Well, I suppose that, and as we should always say, it's alleged that the officer was given the information. What he
Yes.
or she did with it, we don't know. But I would have thought the first thing you should do was say, no, I can't do that. There isn't a legitimate, as I've said on numerous interviews, that there isn't a legitimate lawful reason for me to do that. That's what I would have said. And then I would have told those above me, and they could decide, do we have a quiet word? How do we have a quiet word? And again, there are very senior people in the Home Office, in the palace. And as you probably know, each royal has separate private secretaries and all the rest of it. The most senior is the king, as it is now, in my day, the queen. And you certainly would bring it to their attention. Now, what they choose to do is a matter for them. But I would hope that they have a moral compass, again, which I've quoted many times, and they have an ethical compass. And that should involve somebody either having a quiet word or somebody saying to him, this isn't on. this is not. This is a criminal offence. Now, what you then do is a matter for those above my pay grade. But certainly, as far as I'm concerned, at the time he asked this, he was a public servant. You and I, well, we were paying for him. I suppose by definition, the Commonwealth were in one sense or another, because wherever he went, it cost people money. And normally the taxpayer, I would allege. So, yeah, so many questions. And there are questions to be asked of the palace. Who knew? Who did what? A private secretary, a second to the Queen, he surely would have told somebody. So the question has to be asked, who did he tell at that time? What did they do? And that question remains unanswered.
Hey,
Okay,
Phil, can
so
I do a follow-up question?
of
Just one
course.
more. Scotland Yard announced that there was going to be an internal probe. What faith do you have in that coming to any sort of conclusions, or is that just a PR exercise, do you think?
Well, I don't want to cast aspersions on the current crop, but if you actually look at their track record, going back to the nonsense of the Burrell trial and other anything to do with the royals when it's regarded as corruption and everything else, it seems to fall on fairly deaf. So I'll maintain a cynical approach, but I think the press this time won't let it go. Well, I hope they don't. But as I said to Emily when I went on Newsnight, you were very good, but you're not a police officer. And I was watching some program last night on Panorama, and I was screaming out, "Why didn't you ask this? Why didn't you, when you had this question, dig deep?" And they didn't. They
Yeah.
they went for short answers without probing deeper, which as a copper or an
Yeah.
investigator, I would have done, and I still would now. I'd love to go back and do it with somebody. Each of his answers, I say, then you go back and say this. And why didn't you do that? And this nonsense that he was there for 4 days. No, they weren't. They were discussing how he allegedly could hide the millions that he was given. And again, information is coming out that he was trying to find through Epstein somebody to back a £200 million, which shows he hadn't given up. That nonsense that he was there to say that he was honorably saying goodbye. And people allegedly buy this and they allow
Yeah.
him to say it without anybody probing that nonsense. And it
Mm.
is palpable nonsense.
Okay,
Yeah.
Di, the phone rings tomorrow. The chief constable in the Met. Di, you've been making a lot of noise about this story. So come on, get your hat and coat, get yourself to London. I'm putting you in charge of a new unit to do this properly. What's your first week?
Well, one, they couldn't afford me. And secondly, I'd have to choose. Ironically, years ago, the Prime Minister of Jamaica and the Home Secretary asked me to set up a non-corruptible unit to tackle gangsters there. And I went over there and prepared a plan involving intelligence, SAS, ex-SAS, and what have you. Sadly, it came to nothing, but a senior police officer said, "I'll do it for nothing," because I was going to charge them, obviously. Um, no, I would go over there, and the first thing I would do is get court orders to look at all the documentation being held in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. I'd subpoena police officers. I would subpoena ex-ambassadors to tell me the truth, and then I'd prepare a case, there's a case to be prepared. It's not rocket science.
And you make it sound so simple and so practical, and it's just common sense. And I think most people would think that that's how things should work. And it just makes it so glaringly obvious that there's this gap between what should be happening and what isn't happening. Do you think you've said that now? Do you think there's anyone that has the power to do that now that might be listening to you right now and think, well, I'll do that. That's what I'll do. That's how I'll move this forward.
Well, you would hope so, wouldn't you? Whether it be a politician or a senior police officer who has, in the case of the Met, is the commissioner or the Independent Office for Police, whoever. But as you rightly say, but the trouble is with all these inquiries, they cost millions, they go on for years. No, it needs a short, sharp, and I've often said that when I was investigating the Sultan of Brunei's brother-in-law who'd fiddled my client for 65 million, it didn't take us months. You just get on with it and you get the evidence as and where it leads you. And I keep saying, if you don't investigate, you won't find evidence. And again, here, there are so many avenues that any decent copper would go down. But again, I suppose it's a Pandora's box because already people are trying to say, why is it that we afford one family this huge amount of public money, which is a lot of it is secret, a lot of it is not, you can't tackle it. And I think this, unfortunately for the royals, has opened a Pandora's box, which the lid may not go back down again. That's my view, anyway.
Well, look,
Yeah,
thank you so
that's
much. Thank you so much, Dai, for bringing your bracing Welsh wisdom to this. I wish they
Yes,
would put you in charge, to be honest.
yes. Well, I'm getting very old now. I'm very cynical, perhaps.
Well, look, I,
But it's questions, and I keep probing, and I get really annoyed because so-called experts, some of them are so sycophantic. And the truth is, the public in the United Kingdom and worldwide are looking at this, and it's the reputation and decency. And I keep saying, where's their moral compass? Well, as far as I'm concerned, it's gone completely skew whiff and has done for many years. So who knew what? Who's going to tackle this? I remain cynically not hugely optimistic.
well, maybe we should ask the Australians, please, to do it.
Well, I don't know.
Why
They
not?
they've
well, I
suffered
was
a
so
bit.
disappointed.
They've
Yeah, well, I
suffered
was
a little
disappointed in their
reputationally
response.
wise, haven't they? That's the
Yeah.
trouble, unless you get a fearless Elliot Ness type who will take on everyone and everybody, including vested interests, including former ambassadors. And boy, I'd love to go into that one. It's screaming for somebody with a friend of mine's a professor of ethics, and he says being ethical means having the courage to do what is right. And that's crucial, knowing what is right and then having the courage to do it. And I'm afraid in this country, so many of us lack courage from the tackling the BBC and their nonsenses and their prejudice and their left wing leaning, in my opinion, bias. Nobody tackles it. And unfortunately, you're regarded as a right wing fascist if you dare to do it.
Well, that's a
Well,
conversation for another day, another entertaining one, no doubt. But for this, thank you. And Shauna, thank you so much for joining me all the way from sunny Queensland. And no doubt
Thanks
lovely.
for
we'll
having me.
return to this subject.
Yeah, it won't go
Lovely.
away, will it?
Take care, guys.
No.
Okay, thanks, Shauna.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Phil.
Bye.
Bye
Long live
bye.
the Welsh. Bye. Well, thank you for staying with me, if you have, to the end of what's been quite an intense, maybe emotional episode. It's very hard to talk about these things and to do it properly. Like I said, I probably got a few things wrong in the last show, live and learn. But also, I say thank you to Shauna for being so open. I mean, that conversation went in a direction I didn't expect, talking about her own experience of suddenly finding herself powerless. I mean, not physically powerless, emotionally or psychologically powerless, and shocked because of the way a man had behaved to her in a enclosed space where she couldn't get out, and feeling that later perhaps she could have done more, but you freeze. That's well known. And yeah, so thank you, Shauna. That was a very interesting conversation. I'd really appreciate you being so candid. Not a huge amount more for me to say, I don't think, this episode. Next time, it'll also be personal, very personal to me, actually, because I hope, fingers crossed, it's looking good. I'll be on here with Andy Webb talking about Dianorama, his ultimate definitive book. I still haven't got it. They're holding it back because there's going to be various serializations and things. But this is the ultimate account of what happened on Panorama and afterwards around the Diana interview in 1997. Now, as some of you may know, I'm part of this story a little bit. I'd worked on Panorama. I knew most of the key players. I'd worked a lot with Martin Bashir. There was a time I would have called him a friend. He's been in this house. We've done excursions with our families. And I also knew and know some of the people who tried to blow the whistle And the very worst part of this story for me has always been the BBC's response to that. People trying to speak up, in my view, in defense of the BBC's proper values, and being gaslit. It's a word we didn't use in the 90s, but basically being manipulated out of their jobs, being criticized, being, committees met secretly to say we're going to get people. And I'm not even exaggerating. Don't forget, this is the BBC, internationally respected. Perhaps not as much as it was, but it was then. Totally funded by the taxpayer. The Voice of Britain, famously had its Reithian principles and guidelines. Well, all of those were trampled over by a cohort of people who got to the top of that organization, partly by crushing some of my friends over this story. And I feel quite bitter about it. Not as bitter as they do. I mean, some of them did get compensation 20 odd years later, but it really damaged their lives. I'd say their mental welfare, certainly their careers. It's a very, very unedifying story, and I'm very excited to see what Andy's got to say. I was actually interviewed myself when Panorama in, I think, 2022 did a program about itself and did a good job. And if you look that up on the BBC website, you'll see a little bit of me at the bottom of that story. But yeah, lots to talk about. So I'm looking forward to that very much. It could be another emotional episode. So thank you for your company. Really appreciate your support. Please keep liking. Please keep spreading the word. Christmas is coming. Surely somebody wants one of my lovely mugs to give as a present to their nearest, dearest, or most scandalous friends. Anyway, all the links are in the bio. Many thanks for your time and attention. I'll see you all very soon. Bye. This has been a Podcast World production. If you want to contact me, write to team@podcastworld.org, placing Scandalmongers in the heading, or you can reach out via the social media links in the show's bio. And if you've enjoyed this episode and you want to support the show, please consider taking a few seconds to hit the donate button found just below this video. Many thanks, and see you next week.